Hi everyone. My name is Margaret, but most people just call me Maggie. I want to thank this beautiful channel for giving me a chance to share a piece of my life that I've kept inside for so many years. I'm watching from a quiet little town in Vermont, and I hope every woman listening stays with me until the end, because this isn't just my story. It's a story about love that gave everything, about pride that broke it, and about how sometimes the people we raise, feed, and protect end up building walls where we once built bridges. Please, listen carefully, because what happened to me could happen to anyone who loves without expecting respect in return. I saved for years to attend my sister's wedding, only to be asked to stand outside, because she didn't want her guests to see me. Lily was my little sister, the kind of girl who could light up a whole room just by laughing. We didn't grow up with much, but we grew up with each other. After our parents passed away when I was 24 and she was only 17, I became everything for her: sister, mother, teacher, protector. I gave up college so she could finish high school. I took up 2 jobs. One at a diner during the day, another cleaning offices at night. I used to whisper to myself while wiping tables, one day, Lily will have the life we both dreamed of. Every paycheck went straight to her, her books, her clothes, her dreams. I wore the same pair of shoes for 5 years, but every time she smiled in a new dress, I felt like the richest woman alive. When Lily got accepted to a university out of state, I cried, part pride, part fear. I hugged her so tight that day. I told her, "You go live, Lily. Don't look back. I'll handle the rest." I remember standing at the bus stop as she left, my hands waving till the bus disappeared. The wind was cold, but my heart was warm. I believed that every sacrifice would mean something someday. Years passed. She started calling less often, but I told myself she was busy, that success had its own kind of silence. She graduated, got a big job in the city, and sent me pictures from places I could never afford to visit. She looked stunning, confident, and far from the shy little girl who used to hide behind my skirt. I was proud of her, but sometimes I wondered if she still remembered the nights we shared one blanket and one bowl of soup. Then one afternoon, I got the message that made my heart skip a beat. "Maggie, I'm getting married." Her excitement leapt off the screen. She said it was going to be a grand wedding in a beautiful hall by the lake. My eyes filled with tears. I whispered to the empty room, "She's finally happy." I started saving again. I cut my small pleasures: no coffee from the cafe, no new sweater that winter. I put every spare dollar into an old cookie tin that sat above my fridge. I wanted to give her a gift she would never forget. I spent nights sewing a hand-embroidered shawl, something our mother had taught me to make. Each stitch carried a memory. Of laughter, of bedtime stories, of love. When I finished, I wrapped it carefully in soft paper and tied it with a pale pink ribbon. I imagined draping it around her shoulders on her wedding day, whispering, "You'll always be my little sister." The day finally came. I woke before sunrise, nervous like a child. I put on my best dress, the one I had kept for special occasions, pale blue with tiny white flowers. I fixed my gray hair into a bun and fastened my mother's old brooch near my collar. When I looked in the mirror, I smiled softly. "You look good enough to see her get married," I told myself. The bus ride to the city felt like a dream. I kept glancing at the shawl in my bag, imagining Lily's face when she saw me. I thought of how proud she'd be that I'd come all this way. As the bus rolled past the city lights, I whispered a small prayer: "God, thank you for letting me see her happy." When I arrived at the venue, it took my breath away. White roses everywhere, soft music, laughter spilling out of the open doors. Everyone looked perfect, polished, expensive. I clutched my bag tightly, smiling shyly at the people who walked past me. I could hear the wedding bells ringing, and I felt tears sting my eyes. I whispered, "This is it, Maggie. You made it." I walked toward the grand glass doors, my heart thumping with excitement. The doorman, a young man in a black suit, stopped me with a polite smile. "Invitation, ma'am?" he asked. I reached into my purse and showed him the message Lily had sent me. He glanced at it and said, "One moment, please," before talking into his earpiece. I waited, looking through the glass where I could see people laughing, hugging, taking photos. My heart was so full, I thought it might burst. A few seconds later, a woman in a silver gown approached the door. She looked like one of Lily's friends. Her eyes ran over me from head to toe, pausing at my simple shoes and my old purse. She leaned close to the doorman and whispered something. Then she smiled, one of those smiles that doesn't reach the eyes, and said, "Please wait here. The family section is already full." I blinked. "Full?" I asked softly. She nodded, her earrings swaying like they agreed. "Yes, ma'am. We'll bring you some refreshments outside, all right?" Outside. That word fell heavy, like a stone in water. I looked through the glass again. There she was. My Lily. Dressed in white, glowing, beautiful beyond words. She looked around the hall, laughing with her new in-laws, taking photos under the lights. For a second, I thought she'd see me. I even raised my hand. But she didn't. She didn't look my way. Something inside me went still. I smiled weakly at the doorman, nodded, and stepped aside. I told myself there must be a mistake. Maybe she was just busy. Maybe she'd come out soon. But as the minutes turned into hours, no one came. I stood under a tree, holding that hand-sewn shawl against my chest, listening to the laughter inside the hall. Every sound felt like a reminder of where I didn't belong. And that was when I felt it, a small crack in the heart, quiet, but deep enough to change everything. The night that was supposed to be filled with joy had turned into silence. And I didn't know yet, but that silence was about to teach me the hardest truth I'd ever learned. I stood there, outside the glass doors, with the music from inside washing over me like a wave that never reached the shore. Every laugh, every clap, every sound of joy felt like a reminder of where I wasn't welcome. I told myself maybe it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe she was coming to get me. Maybe she didn't know I was outside. So, I waited. 10 minutes, 20. An hour. The sun began to dip lower, and the shadows grew longer. Still, no one came. Guests kept arriving, their perfume heavy in the air, their heels clicking on the marble floor. Some smiled politely when they saw me standing there, others looked away, as if afraid to catch my eyes. I held the small shawl in my hands, afraid to wrinkle it, afraid it would lose its purpose if I let it touch the ground. My fingers trembled, not from the cold, but from confusion. A young waiter came out carrying a tray of drinks. He stopped near me and asked softly, "Ma'am, would you like some water?" His kindness almost broke me. I nodded, and when I took the glass, my hand brushed his sleeve. It was warm. For a moment, I wanted to cry right there, to tell him that I wasn't supposed to be outside, that I was her sister, that I had raised her like my own child. But the words never left my mouth. I just smiled and whispered, "Thank you, son." Through the glass, I saw her walking down the aisle. The music swelled, and everyone stood. The hall glowed with golden light. Her husband, tall and handsome, took her hand and smiled proudly. They looked perfect. My chest tightened as I watched her take those steps I had dreamed of for years. I thought about all the mornings I woke up early to pack her lunch, all the nights I stayed awake, sewing her dresses, all the prayers I whispered for her happiness. And now, she was happy. Just not with me. Then I noticed something. One of the bridesmaids leaned close to her, pointing toward the door where I stood. Lily's eyes followed her finger, and for a moment, our eyes met through the glass. Just a moment. But it was enough. I saw her face freeze. Her lips pressed tight. And then she turned away, pretending not to see me. That was when the truth hit me like cold rain. She knew I was there. She saw me. But she didn't want me inside. I felt my knees weaken, and I reached for the side of the wall to steady myself. My heart began to ache in a way I can't explain. It wasn't just sadness, it was something heavier, something sharp. The kind of pain that comes when love gets stepped on quietly. A woman standing nearby, dressed in silver, turned to another guest and whispered something. They both looked at me and then laughed softly behind their manicured hands. I pretended not to notice. I stood still, clutching the shawl tighter, my eyes fixed on the glass door. When the ceremony ended, the guests cheered, clapped, took pictures. I could see Lily hugging people, smiling for the cameras. I waited, hoping she'd come outside to find me. Maybe she'd run into my arms, maybe she'd explain it all, maybe she'd say, "Maggie, I didn't mean for you to wait so long." But as the crowd thinned, I realized she wasn't coming. The doorman walked toward me again. His expression had changed. He looked uncomfortable now, almost guilty. "Ma'am," he said quietly. "Miss Lily asked me to make sure you're comfortable here. She said the photographers are still working inside and, it's a little crowded." I stared at him, my lips dry. Crowded? I asked. My voice cracked, old and soft. She doesn't want me inside, does she? He hesitated, his eyes darting away. I'm just following instructions, ma'am. I nodded slowly. I understand. And I did. In that moment, everything became clear. The expensive guests. The designer clothes. The photographers. The image she wanted to show the world. There was no place in that picture for me, an old woman with rough hands and a simple dress. I didn't fit the story she was trying to tell. I looked down at my shoes. They were clean, but old. My dress, neatly pressed, still looked plain compared to the glittering gowns inside. Maybe to her, I looked like a reminder of a past she wanted to forget, the struggle, the hunger, the years of sacrifice. Maybe she thought if people saw me, they'd know where she came from. I whispered under my breath, "I'm sorry if I embarrass you, Lily." And my voice broke on her name. The waiter returned with a plate of small sandwiches. "You can sit here, ma'am," he said kindly, pointing to a chair near the trees. I thanked him again, though the words barely came out. I sat down, staring at the lights flickering inside the hall. I could hear the speeches, the laughter, the clinking of glasses. Every sound was like an echo of the life I had given her. When the couple came out later for photos by the lake, I stood up quietly. I thought, maybe now. Maybe I could give her the shawl. I walked slowly toward the edge of the path, the gift in my hands, my heart in my throat. She turned for a brief second, and I raised the box a little, smiling, hopeful. But before I could say anything, one of her bridesmaids stepped forward, whispering something to her. Lily froze again. Her groom looked at me, then at her, and then someone gently guided me back toward the side. I didn't resist. I didn't speak. I just nodded and stepped back into the shadows. That moment, watching my sister turn her back on me while standing in the glow of her new life, was the quietest heartbreak I've ever known. No shouting, no anger, just a deep, still ache that settled into my bones. I sat down again under the same tree, the night air cool against my face. The music started again, and I could see her dancing, spinning in circles, her laughter floating across the lawn. And I realized something bitter, but true: sometimes love doesn't fade, it just gets rewritten by pride. I stayed until the lights began to dim and the guests started to leave. Then I stood up, brushed the dirt off my dress, and whispered a small blessing into the air. "May you always be happy, Lily," I said softly. "Even if it means forgetting me." And with that, I turned away from the hall, still holding the shawl, the sound of distant music following me like a ghost. The road back home that night felt longer than it had in the morning. The city lights blurred through my tears, but I kept walking. I didn't cry loudly. I didn't shout. I just walked, holding that small box with the shawl pressed against my heart. The wind was cold, but I didn't shiver. My heart had already gone numb. The bus ride home was silent. The driver glanced at me once, maybe wondering why an old woman in a nice dress was traveling alone at midnight, holding a wedding gift. I kept my eyes on the window, watching the world slip by in streaks of gold and gray. When I reached home, the house was dark, quiet, still. I hung my dress carefully, folded the shawl back into its wrapping, and placed it on my table. Then I sat down in my rocking chair, the same one I'd bought secondhand 30 years ago, and let the silence wrap around me. It was the first time in years that silence didn't comfort me. It felt heavy, like a blanket soaked in rain. For a long time, I stared at the photograph on my wall, me and Lily when she was little. She had her arms around my waist, her smile missing a tooth, her eyes full of trust. I whispered to the picture, "Where did you go, sweetheart? Where did we lose each other?" The words trembled into the dark. Days passed, and life went on as it always does. The sun rose, the birds sang, the neighbors waved. I went back to my routine, watering the plants, feeding the stray cats, baking bread for the church. But something inside me had changed. I felt it in the quiet moments, like a song I used to know but could no longer hum. At first, I thought it was anger. I thought maybe I was angry at her for what she did, for letting pride steal the love we built with our bare hands. But as the days went by, I realized it wasn't anger. It was grief. The kind of grief you feel when someone is still alive but no longer sees you. One afternoon, I took out the shawl again. I unfolded it carefully, ran my fingers over the stitches. Each thread told a story. I remembered the nights I stayed awake, sewing, the way my eyes burned under the lamplight, the quiet joy of creating something for her. I held it to my chest and whispered, "You'll never wear it, will you?" And then I smiled a small, sad smile. Because even if she never wore it, it still carried love. My love. The kind that doesn't ask to be seen. I sat on the porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky pink and orange. The air smelled of grass and rain. I closed my eyes and thought about everything I'd given up over the years, not with regret, but with a strange kind of peace. Because giving had never made me weak. It had made me who I was. Love without respect, though that's something else. That's a kind of emptiness no gift can fill. It's like pouring water into a cracked pot, it never stays, no matter how much you give. I realized that night that love alone isn't enough. You can love someone so deeply you forget yourself, but if they stop respecting you, that love turns into quiet suffering. I thought about all the women I'd known who gave and gave until there was nothing left of them. Mothers who raised ungrateful children. Wives who carried households that never carried them back. Sisters who stood in the shadows so someone else could stand in the light. I used to think that kind of sacrifice was noble. But now, sitting there with the wind in my hair and the ache in my bones, I understood it's only noble when it's chosen freely, not when it's taken for granted. A week later, a small envelope arrived in the mail. It was from Lily. My heart jumped when I saw her handwriting. I tore it open with trembling hands. Inside was a short note. "Dear Maggie, thank you for coming. I'm sorry things were hectic. I didn't get a chance to spend time with you, but I'll visit soon. Love, Lily." That was all. No mention of me standing outside. No apology. Just polite distance dressed as affection. I folded the letter and placed it beside the shawl. I didn't cry. I just sat there quietly, letting the truth settle like dust after a storm. She wasn't sorry. Not really. And maybe she never would be. But that was the night I stopped waiting for her to be. I made myself a cup of tea, sweet and strong, and watched the moon rise. I told myself, you did your part, Maggie. You gave her wings. You can't be angry that she used them to fly away even if she forgot who helped her learn. The more I thought about it, the more peace I found. Pain has a strange way of teaching you what peace really is. It's not about forgetting. It's about remembering without bitterness. In the days that followed, I started writing again small stories about life, about women like me, about love that survives even when it's not returned. My words felt like tiny seeds falling into good soil. Each one grew into a small piece of strength. Sometimes, I still dream of that day, the wedding, the lights, her face turning away. But now, when I wake up, I don't feel broken anymore. I feel calm. Because I finally understood that dignity is a kind of love too, the love you give yourself when no one else does. And maybe that's what God wanted me to learn. That silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's grace. The kind of grace that holds you steady when the world tries to make you feel small. I smiled to myself that night, looking at the old photo again. "I still love you, Lily," I whispered. "But I love me too now." And for the first time in years, I slept peacefully. A few months passed after the wedding, and I settled into my quiet life again. The world around me didn't change, but I did. I started to see things differently, the way sunlight touched my garden, the way the kettle whistled in the morning, even the way silence sounded softer now. There was no more waiting, no more wishing she would call. I began learning what it means to stand in peace, even when your heart has cracks. Then, one afternoon in late spring, something unexpected happened. The local church was hosting a charity fair, a small event to raise money for underprivileged children. The pastor asked me if I could contribute something handmade, since he knew I used to sew. I hesitated at first, then smiled and said, "Yes, I'll make something special." That night, I opened the box where the shawl still lay untouched, folded, patient. I ran my hands over the stitches one last time, and decided that it was time to let it go. I added a small tag to it that said, "Handmade with love. May this bring warmth to whoever wears it." It felt right. I donated it quietly, without telling anyone the story behind it. To me, it wasn't just a piece of fabric. It was everything I had once given: love, care, sacrifice, all woven into something beautiful. Letting it go felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. A week later, the church called me. Maggie, the pastor said over the phone. A woman who bought your shawl wants to meet you. She said it moved her. I was surprised but agreed. When she came to visit, she introduced herself as Anna, a teacher at the local school. She told me that when she saw the shawl, she could feel there was something special about it. She had bought it for her mother, who was battling illness, and said it brought her comfort. Tears filled my eyes. I smiled and told her softly, "That shawl has already carried a lot of love. I'm glad it found a new home." That night, I realized something powerful. Sometimes, the love that is rejected in one place finds its way to another. Love never truly dies. It just changes its destination. Months went by, and word spread about my sewing. People started asking me to make custom pieces, blankets, scarves, shawls, all hand-stitched. It became my quiet passion. Each piece had a story, a purpose. And with every stitch, I healed a little more. Then one day, something happened that I didn't expect at all. A woman came to my door carrying flowers. When she removed her sunglasses, my heart stopped. It was Lily, my sister. Her voice trembled. "Hi, Maggie." I didn't move right away, I just looked at her. She looked different, tired, a little older, her eyes not as bright. She said softly, "Can I come in?" I nodded and stepped aside. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd once helped her with homework, the same one where I used to count my coins to send her money. For a long while, neither of us spoke. Then she reached into her bag and placed a small photo album on the table. "I wanted to show you something," she whispered. It was her wedding album. She turned the pages slowly. The pictures were perfect, the lights, the flowers, the people, but her eyes, in every photo, looked hollow. "I thought it would make me happy," she said. "But I can't look at any of these pictures without feeling something missing." I stayed quiet. She looked at me, tears gathering in her eyes. "You should have been there, Maggie." I don't know what I was thinking. I was ashamed. Not of you, but of myself. I thought if people saw you, they'd see where I came from, the small house, the old clothes, the struggle. I wanted them to see the version of me that had moved on. I didn't realize I was moving away from the only person who ever stood by me. Her voice broke. "I've been living with that guilt every day." I looked at her, and in that moment, I saw not a woman who had hurt me, but a girl who had lost her way. I reached across the table, placed my hand over hers, and said quietly, "We all get lost sometimes. The important thing is that we find our way back." She began to cry softly, her shoulders shaking. I didn't cry with her this time. My tears had already been shed months ago. I just held her hand, steady and calm. There was no anger left in me, only understanding. Before she left, she noticed one of my new shawls on the chair. "You made this?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes. I make them for people who need warmth." She smiled weakly. "You always did." That was the moment of truth. Not the kind that shouts or punishes, but the kind that stands quietly, holding its own dignity. She knew what she had done. I didn't need to remind her. Life had already done that. As she left, she turned and said, "You're stronger than I'll ever be." I smiled softly. "No, Lily," I said. "I just learned that love without pride is freedom." After she was gone, I stood by the window and watched her car drive away. The sky was painted with the colors of evening gold fading into purple. I whispered to the wind, "Thank you." Because for the first time, I didn't need an apology to feel whole. I had already given myself closure by living kindly, by turning my pain into purpose. That was my justice, not her guilt, not her regret, but my peace. And in that peace, I felt the world balance itself again, quiet, fair, and full of grace. After Lily left that day, the house was quiet again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It felt softer, gentler, almost like an old friend sitting beside me, reminding me that I wasn't alone anymore. I stood at the window for a long time, watching the clouds drift lazily across the sky. The light was golden, spilling through the curtains like honey. The world felt calm, and for the first time in years, so did I. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my rocking chair. The chair creaked the way it always had, but the sound no longer echoed with loneliness. It sounded like rhythm, like life continuing its gentle dance. I thought about all the women out there who might be listening to me now, women who gave their best, who carried others on their backs, who poured themselves into love until there was nothing left. I wanted to reach through time and space and hold their hands, to tell them, you are not weak for loving, you are strong for surviving what love did to you. The next morning, I walked to the little community park near my home. The sun was soft, the air smelled of spring. Children were playing, their laughter bright and unbroken. I sat on a bench under a maple tree and looked at the world with new eyes. Every leaf seemed greener, every sound clearer. Pain, I realized, doesn't end life, it reshapes it. It gives you a second sight, one that sees beauty where others see nothing. I took out my small notebook, the one I'd started writing in after the wedding, and began to write down everything I had learned. Not as lessons, but as quiet truths. Love must be chosen, not owed. Respect is the breath that keeps love alive. Never build your worth in someone else's reflection. The words flowed easily, almost as if they had been waiting for me all along. A few weeks later, Anna, the teacher who had bought my shawl, invited me to speak at her school. We're having a day for women who've lived through hardship, she said. I think your story could help them. I laughed softly. I'm no speaker, dear, I said. I'm just a woman who lived. But she smiled and said, that's exactly why they'll listen. So I went. I stood in a small auditorium filled with women, young, old, mothers, daughters, dreamers, survivors. My hands trembled at first, but when I looked into their faces, I saw reflections of myself. I saw tired eyes and hopeful hearts. I took a deep breath and began to tell them everything, the sacrifices, the shame, the heartbreak, the silence, and the peace that followed. You could have heard a pin drop. Some women cried quietly. Others just held each other's hands. When I finished, no one clapped right away. They just stood in silence, and then one by one, women came forward to hug me. One of them whispered, "Thank you." I thought I was the only one who ever felt invisible. That day changed me again. I realized that my story wasn't just mine anymore, it belonged to every woman who had ever been forgotten after giving everything she had. My pain had turned into purpose. My loneliness had become connection. From then on, I began volunteering at the same school, teaching young girls how to sew and mend clothes. But what I really taught them was patience, strength, and self-respect. I'd tell them, don't ever let love make you small. The right kind of love makes you bloom. They would laugh and call me Grandma Maggie, even though most of them weren't related to me. I didn't mind. In a way, they filled the space in my heart that loss had once hollowed out. Every evening, when the sun dipped low, I'd walk home and watch the orange light melt into the horizon. My hands would ache from sewing, but my heart felt light. I'd stop by the lake, sometimes the same kind of lake where Lily had her wedding, and sit quietly, watching the ripples move across the water. I found peace there, not in forgetting, but in forgiving. One evening, as I sat there, an old man walking his dog stopped beside me. He nodded toward the sunset and said, "Beautiful, isn't it?" I smiled and said, "Yes. The most beautiful things in life are the ones that come after pain." He looked at me for a moment and nodded, as if he understood exactly what I meant. When I went home that night, I wrote one last entry in my notebook. It said, "I have learned that love doesn't need to be returned to be real. It needs only to be given honestly. And when you give it freely, it finds its way back, not always from the same person, but from life itself." Now, whenever I think of Lily, I don't feel bitterness. I think of her as a part of my story, the chapter that hurt, but also the one that taught me everything. I send her silent blessings when I see the stars, and I hope she found her peace too. To every woman listening to me right now, I want you to remember this: your worth is not measured by who loves you back. It's measured by how you love yourself when no one else does. You can lose everything: your money, your youth, your strength, but if you hold on to your dignity, you've lost nothing at all. And when life puts you outside the hall, don't stand there in shame, stand tall. Because sometimes, God places you outside not to reject you, but to protect you from the noise inside. Outside is where you find yourself again. So tonight, when you go to bed, I hope you hold your heart gently. Tell it, you did your best. Because that's all love ever asks of us, to do our best and then let go. And as for me, I still sit in my rocking chair, with my tea and my quiet, watching the sunrise each morning. The world looks softer now. My heart is lighter. The cracks are still there, but they let the light in. That's what healing looks like. Not perfect, but peaceful. And that, my dear ones, is enough.